Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. We've had a bit of a shave, we're still in lockdown, but today's video you might find really interesting. So we're going to talk about how to style select drop-down menus. As default, you can't really style the options inside, so it's default to either the browser or the OS. So it gets a little bit of a pain. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually style them using radio buttons. So a little bit of an intricate way of doing it. This still lets you use whatever you select in a form. So you can still send off a form using it. So this is why this way is really good. So grab your cup of tea. Mine is just regular tea, milk. So grab your cup of tea and yeah, let's get some coding done. Okay guys, so this is what we're going to create today. It's a form with a full name, email, and this drop down thing here that we can select multiple options from. Now, the problem with drop down option menus is browsers deal with them in the way they want to deal with them. So they style it that is native to the browser or the OS. So what I'm going to show you now is what we would usually get if we just use a select an option. As you can see, this is looking a little bit weird. It has this little blue hover over thing. Now I'm going to just split the screen now and show you what we can style with this select tag. Okay, so here we are. You can see the HTML. We've got select and we've got our options. And if we drop it down, you can see all the options we have. Now let's try and style the select and options on here. So we have a few styles in here already for our buttons and our input fields. This is not a tutorial to learn how to style those. You can just grab this code from the starter theme, which I'll link in the bottom, and then you can get onto the fun stuff basically. So let's style a select. So I'm going to grab this select and we're going to say width 100% because that's kind of where we want it to be. Okay, we can see that that works. Let's say a height of 4M or something like that. Yeah, that's looking good. Probably want some padding to pull the text along from the side. Padding 1 rem. And as you can see here, this is still not, the padding hasn't moved this down arrow from the side. And if I click this open, you can, it's gone width 100%, but it's still the same style. So let's have a look at if we can do option. So if we try to do background color of red, and I open this up, it hasn't taken that. However, if I just copy this background color red into the select will take it. So the problem is the option really, and obviously this little down arrow here isn't following the style either. So we're gonna fix this. So let's get rid of this from our CSS and we're just gonna remove the select option entirely. We're not actually going to be using a select tag. We're going to be using radio buttons. And the reason that this is probably one of the better ways to do this is because when we are creating a form, so this is a form, we want to still be able to send the data that we've selected from that drop down with the form. So if it's a radio button, you can actually send the information that a radio button has, so the name and its value, with the form. If you do it another way, it gets a little bit trickier. You could do it with checkboxes. However, we only want to select one of the items in the menu. So we're going to do it in radio buttons. So let's get into this and start creating it. So we want a container for this to live in. So just above our submit button, let's make a div with a class equal to dropdown. Okay. And we want to make 3 radio buttons in here. So that is input type equals radio, like that. And we want to give each one a name. They all have the same name so that it can deselect the other ones that have the same name. And when it sends the post data, you will have a name. So in our case, it's going to be where. So where did you find us? So it's going to have a name where then the value of the individual field. So each field has a different value, but they share the same name. So let's do that. So name equals where, and it's going to have a value. And the first one's going to be internet search. So it's going to be internet. We just need internet. And as you can see now, it's just a giant checkbox. You see this? So we'll definitely need to do things with that. So we also need a label. So above our input, let's do label. And it's for, we need to link it to the input. And we haven't got the ability yet. So we're going to say for select internet. It needs to be an individual label. And the label is gonna have the name. So it's gonna say internet search. Internet search. Right. Okay. So it's there, but when I click on it, it isn't selecting this checkbox. So how we do that is we create an ID on the input that is the same as the for. So select internet. If I save that, if I click on the label now, you can see the checkbox checked. See that again? Click on the label, the checkbox checks, and that's because the for and the ID are the same. Awesome, right, so we need to do this a couple more times. Let's do a few things first though. Let's give the label a class equal to select item. And even though the checkbox is doing all the actual work, the user isn't going to see that. The user is going to see the label. So I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. So we want a class on this input also. So this can be class equals option, because we're faking an option here. That's good. So let's copy these now. We're going to copy these another 2 times. The for wants to change. So the second one is going to be family. So select family. And the label is going to be family and friends. So how did you find out about us family and friends? The ID needs to change to match the for on each of these. So the ID on the input needs to match the for on the label. Where stays the same because this is going to unselect the other ones. But the value is going to change, and that's going to be family on this one. And for the bottom one, we're going to say select existing customer. So select existing. And it's going to be existing customer in the actual label itself. Existing customer. The value is going to be existing. Existing. And we need to also make sure the ID matches the for. So existing. Oh, existing. Cool. So now, if I click on this, yep. Family and friends will deselect internet search, and existing customer will do that. Okay, perfect. So the labels and the inputs are working great. Now what we need to do is we need to style these up a little bit. So let's jump into our style.css. And on the label, what we're going to do is we're actually going to hide the checkbox itself because the user doesn't need to see that. So let's do a few things. So on select, so on the option, so that option, we're going to display none. Okay, so now we just have our 3 elements. They actually need to be in like a box, I guess, don't they? So let's go Dropdown. So targeting the container that holds them all. And we're going to say, give that a border of 2 pixels, solid, and I've got a hash color for you here, which is D3, D9, F0. There you go. So I'm going to match it to the input fields and give them a nice border radius to match, which is border radius, which is 0.3 rem. There we go. And what we need to then do is we need to create actually a button for them. So we need to create something that when we click, it opens this up. We haven't done that yet. So let's jump back into our index. And how we're going to do this, we've got a drop down. We need something to trigger the drop down to basically show and hide it. So we're going to do that with a button. So just a standard button. We're going to give it a class equals button, just so we can style it. And we're also going to give it an ID equals button because it's going to have a label and we want to grab it in our JavaScript also. So we're going to say, please select 1 as our kind of text. We're going to give it a label. Label for equals button because that's what the ID of the button was. And let's have a look. And the label is going to be, where did you find us? Okay, cool. Let's give that a save, and you can see we have a button that looks a little bit nasty now. So I'm just going to give us a little space. I'm just going to put space between our button and our drop down and our email and our button itself. So here we go. So let's style this button up. Let's make this nice. Let's go above these. So below the label, .button. And we want to do a few things here. So first thing we need to do is we want to make it full width, I guess. So let's do this by saying width 100%. Yep, looking good. Let's give it a height. So height is going to be 3.2 rems. There we go. We need to make the background white. So background color white. We need to put the little arrow at the side of the text so we can see that it's a drop down. So let's put the arrow in the HTML first. Back to our HTML. And you can see we have this button with please select 1. So we actually need to be in here with our little triangle down arrow. So what I'm going to suggest is, let's drop this down onto a new line. And we're going to wrap this label in a span. So span. And grab this closing tag and put this at the end. And we're going to call this class equals, I guess something like select hyphen label. We probably need an ID of label as well. Yeah, let's just call it an ID. Let's have it an ID because we need to, later on, need to grab this with the JavaScript. Right, cool. So then we need to add our arrow in here. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to use Emmet here. So dot arrow tab will give me a div with a class of arrow. We're going to jump back to our style, CSS. And we've got our button here. So just under our button, we're going to say dot arrow. So we're going to style this arrow. And the way the arrow is it's effectively, we're just using borders. So we're going to say border 2 pixel, border solid black. Now we're going to say the border width. Now this is where the magic happens. Border width is going to be 0, 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 0. And that's saying 0 border on the top, 2 pixels on the right, 2 pixels on the bottom, and 0 on the left. So you literally have just 2 sides of this border. And you can see at the moment the line is underneath the button, and that's because we haven't thrown the label one way and the arrow the other. So let's do that now. So in the button here, go to the top, and say display flex, which will make both elements on the same row and they won't be underneath each other. So if you save that, you can see they've both gone to the left and a little tiny little dot up there. So let's justify the content, space between, which should push one left, one right. Save that, and it has, it's right over there. So this button's getting pretty good now. So we're gonna add a bit of padding to it. I'm sorry if it's jumping about a little bit too much, but I kind of want you to understand what's affecting what. So That's looking pretty good. We've still got a small black dot there, which is our arrow. So we're going to actually look at what it is now. So if I go to a padding, 4 pixels in our arrow class, you can see exactly what it is. None at the top, none on the left. It's doing this. And that's because now the actual div itself is 4 pixels wide and high because we've put padding in there. So what we need to do now is we just need to rotate that div so the arrow's pointing down. And we do that by saying transform 45, transform rotate brackets 45 deg, 45 degrees. There we go. Now it's pointing directly downwards. That's a really cool way, not having to involve any SVGs or random UTF characters. So, looking pretty good, but this doesn't work. And if I click this, it doesn't work. And actually, it's refreshing the browser. So, what we need to do is we need to, let's make this padding correct in here. And obviously the submit button is right down here. There's a load of blank space here, and that's because this is relative. So let's make this our drop down position absolute, so it'll overlay anything below it. So we're going to go to our drop down. We're going to go position absolute. There you go. You can see it's now over the button. We need that width to be 100% because it's shrunk 100%. And you can see now, can you see right here, it's very faint, but it's escaping the container. And that's because this drop down is not being relative to the container of all this stuff. So if I go into here, we want the drop down to be relative probably to something. So we're going to wrap this whole drop down and the button in a div. So let's go above the label for the button. Let's create a div with a class of select group. So grouping the items. Oops. Now let's take our closing div and we're going to put it after this drop down div. So this div tag here. Copy it there, and we're also going to just grab the whole thing here and just indent it a little bit just so we can make sense of what's going on. So inside our select group lives our button and our drop down. Okay, great. Get rid of that one there as well. So now we want to make our drop down relative to select group. So let's jump into our style. So we want to say drop down is position absolute. Let's put it above button because it's the parent of it. Dot select hyphen group is position relative. Okay, save that, and you can see now it's pulled itself back in. If you look very carefully, you can see this is overlapped here, and that's all because we've said the drop down wants to be 100%, and we've got some border in there as well. So what we want to do next is we want to just clear that up a little bit. Let's grab each one of these items. So in our HTML, they were called select item. So let's grab each select item, dot select item, and let's do a background color on them. Background color white. So now that submit button should disappear. There we go. And we want to do some padding on them because they're too far to the left and probably too much above and below. So let's do padding 1 rem. There we go, looking better. And they probably want to be color black. The text wants to be black because it looks like maybe they're not selectable at the moment because they're gray. So color black to override the default that we have in here. Perfect. So we probably just want to make them, the select item, have a hover so we know where we are, which one we're hovering over. So dot select item hover. background color is the one we're going to change. Background color. We're going to make that hash F2, F2, F2. Oops. Hash at the beginning here. So when we hover over them, you can see they light up. They hover over. So if I click on one of these now, nothing happens. So this is where we want to do some JavaScript. So at this stage, we're going to jump into the JavaScript. In fact, I'm going to fix this one thing first. You see how this is overlapping? And that's because we've added padding and border to this div, and it's just added them onto 100%. It's 100% plus that border and plus that padding. So to get around this, we just say box hyphen sizing border box, and that just makes it calculate padding and the border and everything within this. Do that, it jumps in line. Perfect. Let us now go into the JavaScript. We want to start off hidden here, actually. So let's add a utility class called hidden into our CSS. So go bottom.hidden. We can say display none. And we want to add that to this dropdown. So add another class here called hidden. And we're going to turn that on and off with JavaScript effectively. So what we're going to do is we want to say when we click the button, do something. So let's grab the button from the page. So const button equals document.query selector. And we want to grab that with a hash, and I think it was called button. And what we want to then say is we want to say when a button dot, we're going to add an event listener. So we want to say when the button is clicked, run this function. So we want to run a function. Now we want to close that off there. We want to toggle that hidden class on and off, right? And if you notice that when we did this before, if I remove this, it's adding a string up here. So if I click the button, it adds some stuff, and that's default behavior, right? So to prevent that from happening, we use something called prevent default, and we need to pass in the button. So to pass the button in, we pass it in the function here. We can say E, which means the event. This can be anything, but E is a very common thing to say. So E.prevent default, like that. And if I refresh, I remove this from my URL and click it now, we're good. So what we want to do now is we want to get the drop-down menu, the drop-down, and when we click on this, we want to hide or show it. So the way we do that is we need to grab the drop-down first, and let's call this, let's give it an ID. ID equals drop-down. Get that saved. So now we can say const, let's call it option. So const option equals document.query selector drop down. There we go, spread that out. So let's create a function called toggle hidden. And this just does one thing. It takes, oh, it's not option, it's select. So select is our variable. So we want to say that select, look at the class list of that select, and we want you to toggle, so we want you to add or remove that class that's called hidden. So if I now save that, we need to take this and we need to call it from here. So when it's collect, call toggle hidden, which should hide and remove that hidden class from the dropdown. So let's try this. There you go. So hide and removing, hide and removing. If I click on one of these, it doesn't do anything. We want this to be changed by the name of this. So please select one should become internet search when I click on it, and it should close. So let's handle that whole title thing first. So we need all the options, each one of the options now. And we do that by saying const options, so all the options, which is document.query selector all, because we're doing this on classes now because there's more than one. So remember the dot, the full stop, the period there. So get all the options, get all the option classes. And what we want to do is we want to say option, we want to add their own click events to them. So for each options, so options.for each element in here, we want to run a function, and we want to call each one of the options, we want to call option. So we're dealing with an individual item here. So what we can do then is we can say option.add event listener, like we did up at the top. It's also a click one, comma, function E, because we're just passing in the option itself, all the stuff that comes along with it. And what we want to do then is say, when we click on this option, we want you to change the title of that select label on our button. We want this title to change. So we're going to create the function called set title, or set select title. And what this is going to do is, we're going to save this to a variable, but we're going to save the label element. So we want to get the label title. So in here, you see all these titles. We need to get one of those. I'm actually going to use the for. So we actually need this, like select internet, for instance. So we need E. So we need this option, all of its things. So that brings along all of its tags and all of its other stuff that we don't really see, but it'll have the label, the ID. They're the things we need. So we've got the label element. So document.query selector. So grab something from the browser. Backtick. So this is not single quotes, this is backtick. On my keyboard, it's the bottom left. So we want to grab this by label. But we want to say grab the selector by label for. I'm just going to show you real quick what this does. So we're going to say select internet. So we're going to grab a label that has a for of select internet. Let's console log that out. Label element. Right. We need to call it from here. Set select title. Passing in that E. And let's have a look. Inspect. Console. When I click on internet search, you can see it's brought me the whole tag, and because that's the E, right? If I click on friends and family, however, it says internet search. And that is because we've just hard-coded a label. So what we want to do is actually, we want to use this E to grab whichever option was clicked on, because this is an individual one. Grab whatever options clicked on. We want to grab that label. And the way we do that is we say, so let's remove select internet from within this function here and use $ curly brackets open, curly brackets closed. And inside the curly brackets, we want to say that E, get the target of it, and we want the ID. Now, because we're clicking on the label, right? Because we're clicking on the option, so that's the checkbox. Because we're clicking on the checkbox, effectively, we need the ID of what we've clicked on. Select internet, because we click on the label, but it focuses the input. So we need the ID from the input, and that's what that's doing. So we're saying get the ID from what you've clicked. So E is what we've clicked because it's passed in here. E.target.id. So now if I click inspect, I go to console, and I click on one of these, that is the internet search one. Friends and family one. But we only want the label itself. We don't want the whole tag. So we just go to our label element here, and we just add .inner text. So now it's just going to pull the inner text out of that. And you'll see this now. If we go to our console again, click on an item, family and friends. Okay. So now we have what we want to replace the button text with. We can do that. So we call this select label, I believe. So let's do const select label equals document dot query selector, and we're going to grab that by its ID, which I believe was called select -label. Finish that off. So then what we can do, we move our console log, we can say select label, the inner text, set that to the label element, right? That's the label. So that was family and friends or anything like that. So now if I click on this, internet search, it changes. Family and friends, it changes. We do need this drop down to disappear. So again, we can call toggle hidden from inside here. Let's call toggle hidden from inside here. So when we select one of these, it closes. So it's in other words closing. Right, now, full name. If we give it something in here, we've got something selected. If we click submit, can you see what's done up here? It's actually added it to the URL. So if we had a backend that we were posting to, this would now send where existing, where family. So that's why we use the radio buttons in the first place, because then it can send, it can use it as a form, it can use itself as a form item rather than doing some other way where you would then have to do something with the form data a bit differently. We might as well use the native form elements to pass the data on that we wanted to pass on. Anyway, guys, I hope that's something you enjoyed. In fact, I'm going to change it. You notice this is hasn't got nice rounded edges, so let's change that. So that's the drop down. No, that's the button, sorry. We haven't styled it. Yeah, here we go. Border radius. Hyphen radius. 0.3 rem. There we go. And border color. Or we can just do border. And we can copy the drop down one. That's the same one. So let's copy the whole border into there. And there you go. Click on it. Family and friends appears. We can submit. It adds family there. Adds internet search up there. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm really enjoying making videos at the moment, and I did this at work, and I thought that would be something great to teach, because when I started, it was one of those tricky things, how to style, select an option, tags. It's just no easy way to do it without going through some of this. So I believe this is the best way, or it's the best way I know of. If you've got another way, let me know in the comments, I'm trying to reply to everything now, and at the moment I can, which is great. I'm enjoying hearing from you guys. I'm enjoying the feedback we're getting. So please just give it a like, subscribe, do all those things. It make me know that you guys are liking the content. So thank you very much again, guys. And yeah, we'll see you soon with another video. Cheers.